That began the many fights where both would throw a punch. To know the marriage was doomed to end, you didn't need a hunch. And my mother would send my brother to take us younger kids down the street. So when the cops showed up to break it up, it's us kids they wouldn't meet. She was smart enough to know if we were there we'd be taken into care. And I guess the idea of losing her kids was something she couldn't bear. So that left my brother in the role of taking us to the neighbors. And my mother putting him in that role didn't do him any favors, because he was just a kid himself, too young to play the role. And putting him in that position was bound to take its toll. So he would have the most memories of the fights between his parents, and how that would play out in him would not become apparent. And when my father finally left, my brother was the only male, and I think he felt responsible to make sure things did not fail. But he had a strong start in life, and he was always self-assured, and for a while he kept an eye so nothing bad would have occurred. He was a natural leader, he attracted many friends, and his confidence just grew because that's what popularity lends. And the friends he cultivated surrounded him for years, and he always seemed the leader in the group he called his peers. It's like he somehow was insulated from the tragedy of his home, like someone who lived inside a glass-protected dome. He was caught up in his life with the admiration of his group, so he didn't get sucked into his family's negative loop. He rarely saw the fights, the cursing, or the swearing, so he didn't experience the atmosphere that continually was wearing. He got to live his life free from the majority of the pain. He got to escape the family while still remaining relatively sane. And he stepped out of the family as he found the girl he'd marry, and he spent more time with her so there were less memories that he'd carry. And when they finally wed, he went off to start their life, so he missed those final years that were filled with so much strife. And he really came to visit because he finally was set free, and so the drama that played out was something he'd never see. All the bitterness that existed between my mother and my sister, and it rubbed our feelings raw like a shoe against a blister. And my mother just got sicker as the cancer grew inside, and the walls bled with pain in the place where we'd reside. And when she had to stop working, there was no money they would pay, despite 25 years that she worked each and every day. And when she went to unemployment, they said she didn't qualify, because they said she had an illness from which she would likely die. And as Christmas time approached, we didn't even have groceries we could eat. And it's like despite the years she worked so hard, her life was a defeat. And if her fellow workers hadn't brought us groceries, we would have ended up with nothing. And despite everything she'd done for her family, they couldn't give us something. And when unemployment finally kicked in and she'd have to go there because they had the power, and despite the fact that she could barely sit, she'd have to wait for over an hour, while people in mink coats sailed in and out without a wait. My mother sat in agony because somehow she didn't rate. And there were so many nights I lied in bed fearing she would die, that I would wake up in the morning and she'd be dead just where she'd lie. Sometimes she'd start coughing as the tumor blocked her breathing, and I wasn't sure if that would be the time that she'd be leaving. And although she'd always said she wanted to die, she tried so hard to live. She even went to faith healers hoping there was some time that they could give. And the charlatans took her money for a hope that couldn't be. They preyed upon her fears as they collected their liar's fee. And I had to stand by and say nothing because of how desperate that she was. I couldn't break her heart by telling her just what the liar does. Then eventually reality struck because she had to go into the hospital, and even in that moment you hoped that anything was possible. So on the day she called the ambulance to come and pick her up, but you'd swear we'd gone to a bank and said that we were going to stick her up, because the ambulance refused to come, saying she had a fatal illness. And I watched my mother's face turn into terror inside that lonely stillness. She said if I die here in front of my children it will be upon your head. And I think in that moment I realized that she would soon be dead. The ambulance eventually came, but they wouldn't bring in a stretcher. They said it was enough that they had decided to come and fetch her. And even though she could barely walk, she wasn't given another choice. She was just another woman who was too poor to have a voice. And she begged me to go with her because it was clear they didn't care. And as I made that trip to the hospital, I knew that this could not be fair. My brother paid me a visit to tell me in 2 weeks that she would die, and then he asked me if I was going to be okay before he said goodbye. And every day I went to the hospital, my mother was delirious with pain, and when I asked the nurse for medication, they acted like I was insane. They said it wasn't time, she'd have to wait another hour, but it made no sense that she was going to die, but I guess they had the power. And I clearly got the message that we had none as I passed the last days of her life. But the way I saw my mother treated felt like someone was stabbing me with a knife. And inside the hate and anger grew at the system that made no sense. And no matter how hard I tried to find the answers, they acted like I was dense. And this is the way my mother's life ended, like someone's garbage thrown away. And as the three of us stood in the hospital hallway, there was nothing left to say. A priest began approaching me, it was clear he wanted to speak. I told him he'd better stay away from me because I was sure I would freak. There was no comfort that could be given for the way my mom was treated, because they took a woman that was once so strong to the place she was defeated. And her death eventually broke the bonds that once held us all together. And for a while we floated in different directions like the wind that blows a feather. It's like we all needed to go away to our respective corners to heal our wounds, because the fight that took a lifetime had left us emotionally in ruins. And we would come together again as the years made the history fade, and we would never talk about the price our family paid. My brother became that successful guy I always knew that he would be. It's like he rose up from the ashes, but he never had to pay a fee. My sister lost her memories of the years she fought my mother. She created new memories in their place as if they were some other. She never came to understand the reasons for their war, so she could never reconcile what they were fighting for. I came to understand it, but her truth wasn't mine to tell. But I know inside she blamed herself, and so she wasn't well. I went through the trial by fire with the addiction at my throat, and all the years of healing just sunk but could not stay afloat. But it was a blessing in disguise as I crawled out of the hole, and recovery took me to a place where one day I'd be whole. But as I thought about my brother, I never really knew him. The image that he sold to me was how he wanted me to view him. I have no idea how he made sense of the family we came from. I often think it was a family that we didn't get the same from. And I wonder if he knows himself, and somehow I don't think he does. And I wonder if who he is today comes from the person that he was. But I realize in this life there are few of us that know ourselves. Most people travel their life and leave their history on the shelves, but they seldom see the baggage that keeps following them around. And often when they die they take it to the ground. And sometimes that's a choice they make, and sometimes it is not. Sometimes it's about the pain in which they fear that they'll get caught. But having made the journey and come out the other side, I wouldn't change a thing about all I did confide. I let the story out and the pain eventually went with it, and the sadness I felt inside found the spirituality to lift it. And finally I found myself free from all the stains, and the joy began to fill the place once inhabited by pain. The only sadness I feel is that I couldn't take my family with me, but each of us has our own journey and the memories will always gift me. And somewhere in another realm we'll meet each other free from history, and there we will discover that it was our love that was a mystery.